March 11, 1942, every senior American naval commander looking at the map reached the same conclusion. This mission couldn't be done. To reach safety, 4 small wooden torpedo boats would have to cross more than 560 miles of enemy-controlled water. Between them and freedom stood Japanese destroyers, patrol boats, aircraft, and one of the most heavily watched coastlines in the Pacific. The odds weren't just terrible, they were mathematically hopeless. Yet one young lieutenant looked at the same map and quietly said it could be done. Not by fighting, not by outrunning the enemy, but by making an entire naval blockade look in the wrong direction. Standing aboard PT-41 was Lieutenant John D. Bulkley. Behind him climbed the most valuable passenger in the Pacific, General Douglas MacArthur. Alongside him came his wife, John, their 4-year-old son Arthur, senior officers, and a handful of men carrying documents that Japan desperately wanted to capture. If even one Japanese patrol spotted them, the mission would end within minutes. No armor protected the boats. Their hulls were only thin mahogany plywood. A burst of machine gun fire could turn thousands of gallons of aviation fuel into an inferno. Everyone understood the danger. What almost nobody knew was that Bulkley wasn't relying on luck. Months earlier, he'd noticed something during his night patrols that every other officer had ignored. It was a tiny detail, one that would soon carry America's most important commander through the center of a Japanese naval cordon, without the enemy ever realizing he had been there. But before that impossible journey began, the United States had already lost the battle for the Philippines. By March 1942, the American defense of the Philippines wasn't collapsing. It had already collapsed. The battleships that were supposed to challenge Japan's advance were gone. Allied cruisers had been shattered in the disastrous Battle of the Java Sea. Japanese aircraft ruled the skies by day, while their destroyers and patrol boats hunted the surrounding waters every night. Corregidor Island stood isolated in the middle of Manila Bay, cut off from meaningful reinforcement. Nearly 11,000 American and Filipino troops still held the fortress, but everyone understood the truth. It was only a matter of time. Washington had made its decision. General Douglas MacArthur had to escape, not for his own safety, but because he was the only commander capable of organizing the defense of Australia and leading the future Allied counteroffensive in the Pacific. Losing him would be more than a military disaster. It would be a political and psychological victory for Japan. The obvious solution was a submarine. But submarines carried few passengers, moved slowly on the surface, and Japanese anti-submarine patrols were becoming increasingly aggressive. Even if one reached Corregidor, there was no guarantee it could safely transport MacArthur, his family, his staff, and vital documents hundreds of miles south. That left one unlikely alternative: 4 aging PT boats. Most admirals considered them little more than fast coastal raiders. Their hulls were only 1/8 of an inch thick. Their fuel tanks were dangerously exposed above the waterline. Heavy seas reduced their speed dramatically, and mechanical failures were common after months of constant combat. One senior officer reportedly warned that sending MacArthur aboard them risked losing America's most valuable commander to a single lucky patrol or one burst of machine gun fire. On paper, he was right. Everything about the mission defied logic. Yet Bulkley kept insisting something the others couldn't see. He wasn't planning to defeat the Japanese Navy. He was planning to make them search for the wrong target. That confidence puzzled everyone. Because Bulkley wasn't following anything he had learned at the Naval Academy. The idea that would save the mission came from men who had spent their lives breaking the law, who taught Bulkley the tactic that fooled an entire Japanese blockade. Lieutenant John Duncan Bulkley didn't look like the man who should be carrying the fate of the Pacific. He was only 30 years old. Most officers his age dreamed of commanding battleships or cruisers, the giants of the Navy, that won famous victories and built legendary careers. Bulkley had chosen something different: small, fast torpedo boats. To many senior officers, it looked like a career dead end, but that mistake had taught him something no classroom ever could. Before the war, Bulkley had spent time operating along the Chinese coast, where he watched smugglers move through waters patrolled by armed authorities almost every night. They rarely relied on firepower. They relied on psychology. When patrol boats expected someone to sneak slowly through the darkness, the smugglers did the opposite. They stayed close to dangerous coastlines, used reefs and shallow water as shields, and moved through places larger ships avoided. They survived because they understood one simple truth: the safest route wasn't the one with the fewest enemies. It was the one the enemy believed nobody would ever dare to use. Bulkley never forgot that lesson. Months of combat around Manila Bay only reinforced it. While fighting desperate night patrols, he memorized reefs, sandbars, hidden channels, and the rhythm of Japanese patrol routes. He noticed where searchlights swept, where destroyers turned back, and which stretches of coastline were ignored because they were considered too dangerous for large warships. Every patrol became another piece of a map that existed only in his memory. To everyone else, Manila Bay looked like a prison. To Bulkley, it looked like a maze. And every maze has a blind spot. What he proposed next shocked even experienced officers. He wanted to do the one thing naval doctrine warned commanders never to do. He wanted to split the boats apart. At first, the idea sounded completely insane, but within 48 hours, it would become America's only chance. March 9, 1942, 2 days before departure. The mission was close to being canceled. Fresh intelligence reported a Japanese destroyer patrolling the exact stretch of water the PT boats were expected to cross. If the report was accurate, 4 wooden boats carrying General MacArthur would sail straight into a warship built to hunt and destroy them. Several officers urged a delay. It was the sensible choice. Wait for a better opportunity. Wait for calmer seas. Wait for the patrol to move. But Washington had already given MacArthur his orders. There was no extra time. Every day he remained on Corregidor increased the risk of capture. Bulkley listened to the arguments, then quietly disagreed. The destroyer isn't the problem, he believed. The patrol pattern is. Instead of postponing the mission, he proposed something even riskier: leave earlier. For weeks, he'd been watching Japanese movements during his combat patrols. The patrol ships weren't wandering at random, they followed routines. They checked the same sectors, turned at nearly the same points, and repeated almost identical schedules, night after night. Bulkley gambled that if the boats departed several hours ahead of the expected transit, they would slip through the gap just before the destroyer returned to its station. But that wasn't the only rule he intended to break. Standard naval doctrine demanded ships stay together. A tight formation concentrated firepower and allowed vessels to protect one another if attacked. Bulkley wanted the opposite. After clearing Corregidor's minefields, the 4 PT boats would spread out across the darkness, separated by hundreds of yards. 4 boats, 4 different silhouettes, 4 different wakes. Instead of one obvious convoy, the Japanese would have to find 4 nearly invisible targets hugging a coastline their larger ships avoided. To many officers, it sounded reckless. If one boat was discovered, the others might never know. If one engine failed, its crew could be left behind. Bulkley accepted every one of those risks because he believed something even more dangerous than separation was being easy to find. A few hours later, the engines roared to life, and 4 wooden boats slipped into the darkness, without knowing whether sunrise would reveal freedom or the entire Japanese Navy waiting ahead. Within hours, a Japanese warship would pass so close that one wrong movement could end the mission forever. At exactly 8 p.m. on March 11, 1942, the 4 PT boats slipped away from Corregidor. No running lights, no radio chatter, only the deep growl of overworked Packard engines fading into the darkness. For the first hour, they remained together, carefully threading through American minefield. Once clear, Bulkley gave the signal. The formation dissolved. Each boat disappeared into the night, keeping just enough distance to avoid becoming one large target, yet close enough to regroup if disaster struck. For the crews, it was a terrifying silence. Every shadow looked like a destroyer. Every wave sounded like another engine. Then, just before midnight, one of the lookouts froze. Ship, starboard, a dark silhouette slowly emerged from the horizon. Too large to be another patrol boat. Too fast to be a freighter. It was almost certainly a Japanese warship. No one spoke. Bulkley didn't order full speed. He didn't turn away. He did something far more dangerous. He held his course. Instead of fleeing into open water, PT-41 eased closer to the coastline, letting the dark outline of the land swallow its tiny wooden hull. The engines dropped to little more than an idle. Even the glow from instruments was covered. For 11 endless minutes, the Japanese ship crossed their path. The distance kept shrinking. Crewmen tightened their grip on their weapons, knowing they would be useless if the searchlights came alive. One beam across the water, one lookout raising an alarm, and General MacArthur's escape would end before midnight. The searchlights never came. The cruiser steamed west, never altering course. Only after its engines faded into the distance did anyone aboard PT-41 breathe again. But the danger wasn't over. According to post-war patrol records, Japanese vessels were operating throughout the corridor that night. Destroyers, patrol craft, picket boats. By dawn, Bulkley's boats had threaded through the heart of the blockade without a single confirmed contact report from the Japanese. It seemed impossible. Then the sea itself turned against them. Massive swells scattered the formation, and one boat, PT-32, began suffering serious engine trouble. Now Bulkley faced a choice no plan had prepared for. Leave a crippled boat behind, or risk losing everyone by slowing down. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe now, because the next mission we'll cover is just as unbelievable, and every bit as true. Bulkley's hardest decision wasn't escaping the Japanese, it was deciding who he could afford to wait for. By dawn, on March 12, Bulkley faced a threat no amount of planning could control: the ocean. Towering swells slammed into the lightweight PT boats, lifting them high before crashing them into deep valleys of water. Waves poured over the open cockpits. Crewmen bailed constantly, just to keep the boats dry enough to fight another hour. Below deck, General MacArthur's 4-year-old son clung to his mother beneath a canvas cover that did almost nothing to stop the spray. The passengers were soaked, exhausted, and still hundreds of miles from safety. Then another problem struck. PT-32's engines began overheating. The battered boat started falling farther and farther behind. Every minute Bulkley waited increased the chance that Japanese aircraft would spot the formation after sunrise. But abandoning PT-32 meant leaving American sailors to face the enemy alone. For a long moment, there was no perfect answer, only bad ones. Bulkley made the hardest decision of the mission. MacArthur and the most critical passengers were transferred to the strongest boats, PT-41 and PT-34, while PT-32 struggled on at reduced speed with her crew refusing to quit. Now the formation was broken. No one knew if all 4 boats would reach Mindanao. The hours crawled by. Every distant shape on the horizon forced men to their battle stations. Every aircraft engine made heads turn toward the sky, yet the attack never came. Late that afternoon, the coastline of Mindanao finally appeared through the haze. One by one, the surviving PT boats reached Cagayan. Against every prediction, every major passenger had survived. Not a single Japanese warship had intercepted them. Not one Japanese aircraft had attacked them. And perhaps the most astonishing fact of all, Japanese operational records contain no confirmed contact report for MacArthur's escape that night. The greatest escape of the Pacific War hadn't succeeded because the Americans fought their way through the blockade. It succeeded because the blockade never realized it had failed. But Bulkley's reward wasn't fame. It was another war, and history was only beginning to understand what his impossible mission had changed forever. The Navy that dismissed PT boats would soon build hundreds more, and Bulkley's madness would become legend. When the mission ended, Lieutenant John D. Bulkley didn't celebrate. There was no victory parade waiting on the beaches of Mindanao, no cheering crowds, just exhausted crews climbing out of battered wooden boats after more than a day without real sleep. The mission had lasted barely 35 hours. Its consequences would last the rest of the war. Within days, General Douglas MacArthur reached Australia, where he took command of the Southwest Pacific area. From there, he directed the long Allied campaign that fought its way back across New Guinea, through the Philippines, and ultimately toward Japan itself. Before leaving Corregidor, MacArthur had made a promise to the men he was forced to leave behind. "I shall return." More than 2 years later, he did. For Bulkley, recognition came quickly. In August 1942, he received the Medal of Honor, becoming one of the first PT boat officers to earn America's highest military decoration. He would continue serving throughout the war, later commanding destroyer escorts in the Atlantic and taking part in operations off Normandy. But perhaps the greatest legacy belonged to the boats themselves. Before March 1942, many senior officers dismissed PT boats as little more than coastal nuisances, too fragile, too lightly armed, too limited to influence the course of a major war. Bulkley had proved something different. In the right hands, speed could defeat strength, knowledge could defeat numbers, and a commander who understood the enemy's habits could slip through a blockade without firing a single shot. By war's end, the United States had built more than 500 PT boats, deploying them across the Pacific and beyond. They would raid enemy shipping, rescue downed airmen, land commandos, and strike where larger warships couldn't go. The mission, once dismissed as madness, became one of the defining legends of the PT boat program. And the most astonishing part? The Japanese Navy never filed a confirmed report that MacArthur's escape had happened. The most important man in the Pacific crossed the heart of an enemy blockade, and the enemy never knew they had lost him. If stories like this fascinate you, don't stop here. The next video in this playlist tells the story of another impossible World War II mission that changed history against even greater odds. Watch it now and discover the hidden heroes history almost forgot.